Hi, I'm Jill Goldsmith, Chatham Town Manager, and thank you for joining us for the 2022 Annual Town Meeting Preview Show. I will be joined today by other Team Chatham members to review each article in detail and note recommendations from town boards and committees to help you make informed decisions at the annual town meeting on Saturday, May 14th. We will review each article in the order in which they appear on the warrant. You will receive a warrant booklet by mail, and the warrant is also available on the town's website. As of Tuesday, May 3rd, the Select Board voted to change the venue to outdoors. Town meeting will now be held on Veterans Field at 1 Veterans Field Road, beginning at 1 p.m. on Saturday, May 14th. And our town election will be held at the Community Center on Thursday, May 19th. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Alex Halala. I'm the Finance Director for the Town of Chatham, and we'll begin going over all the financial articles for the annual town meeting warrant. So starting with all things fiscal for FY 2022 and FY 2023, we have one article for FY 2022, which is the current fiscal year, and that's Article 3, the prior year bill payment. This article is requesting $1,306.75 to be transferred from free cash for the payment of a prior year bill. And that bill is from Woodward & Curran and was for services done in January of 2021. This vote requires a 4/5 majority at annual town meeting for approval. And the Select Board voted approval by a vote of 5-0, and the Finance Committee also recommended approval by a vote of 6-0. Moving on to Article 4, FY 2022, which again is the current fiscal year, budget adjustments and transfers. This article is requesting that we transfer funds from free cash to various special revenue funds that are currently in a deficit state. And what we're requesting is $481,118.36 to balance the following line items. The Winter Rapid Recovery Program, $10,389.49. The Morris Island U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services Grant, in deficit $4,614.54. And the largest one, the COVID-19 FEMA reimbursement account, $466,114.33. And I'll talk to that a little bit more detail in a few minutes. The Winter Rapid Recovery Program had received grants. We received grants of over $100,000. However, we expended a little bit more than was received over the two fiscal years back in FY 2014 and 2015. And the Morris Island U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service grant was also a 2013 grant and was never completed. So the funds that we're requesting here were for design and engineering costs, and reimbursement was not requested. The larger one, the COVID-19 FEMA reimbursement account, we're still waiting final determination from FEMA on eligible costs and reimbursement. Oftentimes with FEMA, it takes a long time to receive reimbursements, as just a number of years ago, we received reimbursement for Superstorm Sandy. So what we're asking is to fund this deficit, and then when we receive reimbursement, the funds will be put into the general fund and closed to free cash, therefore replenishing the use of this free cash. The Select Board has recommended approval by a vote of 5-0, and the Finance Committee also approved this by a vote of 7 in favor and none opposed. Moving on to some of the annual articles that you see, they're very routine for town meeting. Article 5 is to fix the salaries of elected officials. This article does not appropriate any money, however, fixes the salaries. The appropriation is under the FY 2023 budget article, which will be discussed in more length. Article 6 is for the consolidated revolving funds. The amount of expenditures must be approved by town meeting every single year. This year, we're requesting $8,000 for the Bassett House revolving fund, $100,000 for the Inspectional Services revolving fund, $5,000 for the Recycling revolving fund, $10,000 for the Marconi Station revolving fund, $500,000 for the Waterways User Fee revolving fund. You may note that we have segregated the Airport revolving fund under a separate article, Article 7, which is the next article. Article 6 was approved unanimously both by the Select Board and the Finance Committee. Article 7 is the Airport revolving fund authorization. This article was separated out due to the increase in the request for authorization and is requesting $150,000 for FY 2023. The revolving fund proposed an increase of $75,000 for FY 2023 over the authorization limit from FY 2022. And as you might recall, the Select Board and Finance Committee both approved an increase in the FY 2022 authorization, which is this current year. So again, we're requesting $150,000 for the airport revolving fund for FY 2023. And there are revenues are sufficient in the revolving fund that the airport receives to support this increase. Again, revolving funds must be supported by the revenues they bring in, and there's no impact on the tax rate or any contribution from the general fund. Moving on to another standard article that you see every year is Article 8, the Wood Waste Reclamation Facility Enterprise Fund. This is the one enterprise fund that the town of Chatham has. And again, it is set at $25,000 for the Wood Waste Enterprise Fund. This article was also approved by the Select Board by a vote of 4-0, and the Finance Committee by a vote of 7 in favor and none opposed. So Article 9, the FY 2023 operating budget, is presented at $35,045,826. That's an increase of $2,530,000 over the current year budget, or 6.07% over FY 2022. More details are in Appendix C, page A41 in the back of your warrant, and are also available on the town's website, as you can see the link posted below. The increase of $2 million does require some justification, as that's a large increase where the town has only seen slight increases over the past 2 fiscal years. As you might recall, in FY 2021, we had to pivot the budget from a growth budget to what we called budgeting in the unknown due to the pandemic. In FY 2022, we continued with a COVID core services budget, again, keeping costs as stable as possible. For FY 2023, we've presented a COVID sustainable service budget, also known as budgeting for a resilient and sustainable future. So this is a growth budget as we had first presented back in FY 2021 prior to the pandemic. Some of the increases and enhancements to the budget, if you've been following the Select Board and Finance Committee review of the budgets, are enhanced staffing. So there are 7 additional positions proposed for the FY 2023 budget. As mentioned, for the FY 2021 budget prior to the pandemic, we had also proposed additional staff. The staffing for FY 2023 is a Housing and Sustainability Director, a cemetery laborer, 2 firefighter EMT paramedics, an assistant conservation agent / wetlands permit coordinator, and additional help for Channel 18 and IT with an additional media assistant / IT assistant. And the pages A17 and A18 in the appendix in the warrant go over some of these in detail. Also, some of the increases are due to contract operations, technology costs, both health insurance and general property liability insurance, and some legal costs. Should all the items for town meeting pass, we're estimating that the tax rate for FY 2023 will go up by 1.14%, but this is not based on any increase in valuations. So that would mean a tax rate, estimated tax rate of 4.67. As you might recall, we are very aware that it's not just the tax rate, but the tax bill to our local citizens. And we always look to keep this as flat as possible. Much of this is explained in Appendix B, the town manager's budget message in the town meeting warrant, and the detail for the operating budget is under Appendix C, page A41 in the back of your warrant. The Select Board recommended the operating budget by a vote of 5 in favor, none opposed, and the Finance Committee also approved the operating budget by a vote of 7 in favor, none opposed. The next articles, Articles 10, 11, and 12, are for the school districts. Article 10 is to amend the agreement with the towns of Chatham and Harwich with respect to the formation of the regional school district. The regional school district, the Monomoy Regional School District, was formed in 2012, and it's time now for a review of the regional agreement. This issue arose mostly because Harwich is paying for 75% of the Chatham Elementary School, which has less students than the Harwich Elementary School and has resulted in fiscal inequity between the two towns. The cost of educating a student at Chatham Elementary School is approximately $8,000 more than the cost of educating a student at Harwich Elementary School because of the number of students. Also included in this is that the assessment would allow each town to pay for its own elementary school. Thus, Chatham would have the responsibility for paying for Chatham Elementary School, and Harwich would be paying for Harwich Elementary School. There are some changes to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education is also requesting in the regional agreement. But reviewing this article and reviewing the Appendix B for complete analysis, and that is in the back of the warrant, again, Appendix D shows all the changes, what is changing and what is remaining the same in the regional school district. And we wanted to ensure that Chatham remained on the school committee to have a voice for Chatham. This, again, just changes the assessment, which will come up in the next article, Article 11. Article 10 was approved by the Select Board by a vote of 5 in favor, none opposed, and the Finance Committee, with 6 members present, also voted 6 in favor and none opposed. Article 11 is the regional school operating budget for Monomoy Regional School District. You will note in the warrant on page 24, there are 2 methodologies. FY 2023, the current methodology, should the regional agreement not be amended, shows the amount of $8,773,840 for the FY 2023 assessment to Chatham. If the regional agreement amendments are accepted, then the proposed methodology would be used for the Chatham assessment. That would be $9,513,587. And the motion shows that we would appropriate the $8.7 million and an additional $739,747 to meet that $9.5 million that you see in the column under the proposed methodology. And this would allow for Chatham to fully fund its own elementary school, and Harwich would fully fund its own elementary school in their town. Important to note out that the school budget of $42,801,403 is an increase of just 2.9% over FY 2022 budget. The Select Board voted recommendation to approve by a vote of 5-0, and the Finance Committee also approved unanimously by a vote of 6 in favor, none opposed, and none abstaining. Moving on to the other regional school district, the Cape Cod Regional Technical High School, you will note that the assessment for Chatham has decreased for FY 2023, and that is directly due to the number of students decreasing. So the proposed budget for FY 2023, $355,235, a decrease of just under $97,000 from FY 2022. And that does include debt service for the new school building. Both the Select Board and Finance Committee unanimously approved this article.
Article 13 is a placeholder article. It's for the collective bargaining agreement settlements for 2 of the town's unions. We're currently in negotiation, and if there is a motion to offer that requires funding, we will present that at town meeting. Article 14 is a placeholder article entitled Collins Center Classification and Compensation Plan. A few years ago, we received grant funding to conduct a thorough review of the town's compensation and classification for all town positions. This project is still in process, and if we have an item to present to town meeting, that will be presented as a motion, so no recommendations have been made by any of the town boards or committees.
Article 15 is requesting funds to be transferred into an expendable trust fund for retirement. This is requesting $95,000 and is not for retiree benefits. It is to pay out accrued time for employees who may be retiring. The town currently has a trust fund on the books for this purpose with a balance of 45 cents. It's been on the books for the town for many years, beginning in the 1990s. So again, this would fund payouts for employees who are retiring, such as accrued sick time, if they're eligible, vacation time, if they're eligible for payouts. We think this is a prudent thing to do, as we never know when somebody's going to retire, and if they retire towards the end of the fiscal year, that can have a negative impact on our balances. So again, it's good to fund this up front. If it is used, we will be requesting funds to replenish it in the future. The Select Board approved this by a vote of 5 in favor, none opposed, and the Finance Committee also recommended 7 in favor and none opposed. Moving on to another routine article that you see every year is Article 16, the Water Department operating budget, proposed at $3,857,002. This funds salaries, expenses, debt service, and includes the contract services for our water operators. This is funded mostly through water rates. However, $400,000 is a contribution from the tax rate, which goes to fund water suppression, namely fire hydrants. The Select Board approved this article by a vote of 5-0, and the Finance Committee also approved by a vote 8 in favor and none opposed. Article 17 on page 29 of your warrant is the 5-year capital plan authorization, and that is requesting $2,556,600 for FY 2023. The capital plan full detail is in your appendix in the G and the end of the warrant, which shows the 5-year capital plan moving out to FY 2027. But again, this is just for the first year, FY 2023, the upcoming fiscal year, and is funded primarily from free cash as well as other available funds, and no impact from the tax rate. The capital plan is presented at 6.69% of the operating budget, which is in compliance with the town's fiscal policies, and again, is an Appendix G in the warrant. The Select Board approved this by a vote of 5 in favor, none opposed, and the Finance Committee also recommends this, 7 in favor and none opposed. Article 18 is another routine article that you're used to seeing in the warrant, and this is for funding for water mains. This year, we're requesting $750,000 for the replacement of the old, unlined, and undersized water mains. Again, this is usually an annual appropriation that varies in the amount of funding. However, you've seen this many times. This is the only water capital article being requested at this time. And the funding source is water surplus, and there's currently a balance of $1,125,134. So that will leave a balance to carry forward for next year if this $750,000 is approved at town meeting. The Select Board voted to approve this by a vote of 5 in favor, none opposed, and the Finance Committee also voted in favor, 8 in favor, none opposed.
Article 19 is the Child Care Voucher Program. This article seeks funding in the amount of $100,000, an increase of $25,000 from the prior years. This is an important program to serve Chatham residents and those who work in Chatham for childcare and after-school and camp programs. The Select Board recommendation for Article 19 was unanimous, 5-0, and the Finance Committee voted approval at a vote of 5-0 with 1 abstention. Article 20 is a family support preschool program. This is a new program for 3 and 4-year-olds. Funding in the amount of $425,000 is being sought for the first year of this program as a warrant article, so any unexpended funds can carry over into the next fiscal year. The Select Board voted unanimously to approve, 5-0, and the Finance Committee recommendation to approve was also unanimous at 6-0.
Hello all, this is Dr. Robert Duncanson, your Director of Health and Natural Resources, here to talk about some of the articles on the upcoming 2022 annual town meeting. The first article that I'd like to start with is Article 21, which is a capital article for dredging. This is an article you've seen before. This provides funds for our various dredging projects throughout the town of Chatham. Lately, in the last couple of years, it's been primarily targeted at the Stage Harbor entrance channel, And then when we do that dredging, we also use that material that's dredged for beach nourishment on Hardings Beach, Cockle Cove Beach, and down towards the South Chatham Forest Beach area. So as I said, this is pretty much an annual article. Again, this year, we're asking for $300,000 in the article. And we also have a $100,000 request that is part of this year's capital plan. So this year, we have a total of $400,000 split between $100,000 in the capital plan and $300,000 in this article, which would be coming from free cash. The Board of Selectmen supported this article 5-0, as did the Finance Committee.
Article 22 is the Other Post and Benefits Liability Trust Fund appropriation. Again, another article that you're used to seeing annually at the town meeting. And this is requesting $150,000 be transferred from overlay surplus into our OPEB Benefits Liability Trust Fund. The OPEB Liability Trust Fund, again, is to fund benefits, not retirement benefits, but health insurance benefits for retirees. Our current unfunded liability as of June 2021 was just under $17 million at $16,994,519. And the plan's fiduciary net position was $3,161,508 at the same time. So the town has gone a long way to start to fund this liability, especially with the reallocation of the land bank tax that took effect a couple years ago. The Select Board approves this article by a vote of 4 in favor, none opposed, and the Finance Committee also approved this by a vote of 7 in favor, none opposed.
The next article that we have up is a new request, and this is a request coming originally from the Board of Health. The last couple of years, the Board of Health has been wrestling with the issue of nuisance properties, primarily targeted towards one property recently up on Mill Hill Road, but the board has been made aware of several other properties in town that may rise to the level of the board having to declare them a public health nuisance. The difficulty that the boards run into is when the property owner is unwilling or unable to undertake a cleanup of the nuisance condition. There really hasn't been any funding available for the Board of Health to then step in, take up the cleanup themselves, or with not themselves, but with a contractor. And then following the cleanup, the property would be liened in accordance with Massachusetts state statutes. So to provide the Board of Health more flexibility and the ability to respond to these situations in a timely manner, the board has requested the creations of a Board of Health nuisance remediation account. And this account would initially be funded with the $150,000 request that is before you tonight, and that would come from free cash. And it would require a vote of the Board of Health to expend funds from this account once the Board of Health has declared that, in fact, there is a nuisance condition on a piece of property, and normal channels to get it addressed have been unsuccessful. Meaning contact with the property owner, working with the property owner, or other interested parties to try and get the property cleaned up so that it no longer is a nuisance in the opinion of the Board of Health. So once this fund is established, it would require the board to take that vote to declare the property a nuisance, and it would also take a vote of the Board of Health to indicate that they are going to use funds from this account to try and mitigate the condition and clean the property up in a timely fashion to avoid further injury to neighbors, abutters, or other members of the community. As I said, this request is for $150,000 from free cash. And this was supported by the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee unanimously. Okay, the next article I wanted to talk about is Article number 24, and this is the Fisherman's Storage Area Relocation Project. As you may or may not be aware, the fishermen in the town of Chatham, or some of the fishermen in the town of Chatham, have had an area immediately east of the airport system on airport property where they've been able to store pots, crab pots, lobster pots, fishing gear, fishing nets, and other ancillary equipment for the last several decades. Recently, the FAA, as part of their environmental assessment of the airport, indicated that that use, so the storage of this fishing gear at the airport site, was inappropriate with the airport operations, that this storage could attract wildlife and waterfowl, which, doesn't necessarily mix well with airport operations. So the FAA has directed, and the airport commissioners who have ultimate authority over the property have indicated that the fishermen's storage area next to the airport must close. And so we've been working over the last year or so with the fishermen, with the airport commission, as well as other town staff to try to find an alternate location within the town of Chatham to move the fishermen's storage area. Following an exhaustive evaluation of the need, so how big an area we need, not in close proximity to abutters, far enough away from the airport that we wouldn't have the same problem all over again, an area adjacent to the wastewater treatment plant, basically between the wastewater treatment plant and the capped landfill, was identified as a potential new fishermen's storage area. However, it will require some evaluation. That evaluation is currently ongoing, and we're waiting for a final report for a consultant to evaluate whether or not that area can be used for the storage of fishing gear and what the potential cost may be to retrofit that area to accommodate that use. In addition, we also have an environmental site assessment underway at the location of the current fishermen's storage area to determine whether or not there have been any issues created environmentally with the storage of this fishing gear over the last couple of decades. Both of those studies are underway, and they will be finished probably later this week, and then there will be a further discussion before town meeting, before the Board of Selectmen on this article. So for today's presentation, I do not have a sum that was allocated to this article because we haven't determined what that final amount may be, but that final amount will be discussed in further discussions with the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee, and ultimately there will be a recommendation or not on the floor of town meeting. And so further details to come on this particular article.
Article 25 is a capital article for the Old Comers Road traffic safety improvements. This article is requesting $80,000 to be transferred from free cash for the costs related to the installation of solar-powered LED stop signs at the intersection of Old Comers and Training Field roads. This will include costs for engineering, design, and permitting. This article was recommended by the Traffic Safety Committee as well as the DPW Director. Again, $80,000 coming from free cash to fund these solar power stop signs at this intersection. The Select Board approved this by a vote of 5 in favor, none opposed. And the Finance Committee also recommends this, 7 in favor, none opposed.
The next article that I wanted to talk about is Article number 26, and this is the Cape Cod Water Resource Restoration Project. The Cape Cod Water Resource Restoration Project is a cooperative effort between the federal government through the USDA, U.S. Department of Agricultural Resources Natural Resource Conservation Service, there's a mouthful, as well as Barnstable County and all 15 towns on the Cape. The project started about 10 years ago now, when some federal money became available to undertake various restoration projects around Cape Cod, primarily targeted at 3 areas. One was fish passages, so to improve the passage primarily of alewives from the ocean into the freshwater ponds where they then spawn and then go back to the open ocean. Stormwater projects to mitigate the impacts of stormwater in shellfish beds and swimming areas. And then the third subject area was wetland restoration projects. So a comprehensive plan was put together in the cooperation with the 15 towns on the Cape, as well as Barnstable County, spearheaded by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, as well as the Cape Cod Coastal Resources Committee. And that final report was submitted to Washington, D.C., and initially funded to the tune of $10 million. So over the last number of years, there have been a number of projects undertaken and completed under this program, as well as there are still a significant number of projects, over 100 projects, still remain on the list to be done. Now, some projects in the intervening years, when federal funding kind of slowed down, have been undertaken by the various towns, so that that list of outstanding projects has been whittled down a little bit. But there are still a significant number of projects in all three subject areas that remain to be done. So the county and the committees were recently notified that the federal government is going to refund this project. We were asked to update the entire plan that was put together, over 10 years ago to account for all the projects that have been completed either through the program or by the towns themselves. That has been done. And a new request has been submitted to the federal government for funding this program. It's anticipated we will hear how successful that is later this year. We're highly anticipating that it will be successful given all the federal funding that is currently flowing through the post-pandemic kind of stimulate the various economies through federal projects, one of which we anticipate will be this one. So the town was working with the folks at the Barnstable County and the Cape Cod Conservation District, who is also spearheading this project. And three main projects were identified for Chatham over the next 3 years. We have the Route 28 Culvert Fish Passage, which includes the herring run from Riders Cove up into Stillwater Pond. There is a salt marsh restoration project at Route 28 and Frostfish Creek that is being done in conjunction with the town, the Mass Department of Transportation, the Chatham Conservation Foundation, and the Water Resource Restoration Project. And then there is a couple of stormwater projects on Sears Road, Oliphant's Lane, as well as Little Mill Pond at Homestead Lane that the town identified and has on the list of projects for funding. So the total of those projects over the next 3 years is about $2.4 million, of which 25% of that is required in local match. So after discussion with the town manager and the finance director, that match was about $730,000. However, we decided it made more sense to appropriate $850,000, given the fact that these are programs over the next 3 years, and to account for inflation, which we all know right now is very high, as well as the cost of construction materials. We made the decision to ask town meeting to appropriate $850,000 from free cash to fund the town's 25% share of the Cape Cod Water Resource Restoration Project. The Board of Selectmen unanimously approved this article 5-0, and the Finance Committee supported the article 7-0.
Hi, I'm Katie Donovan, the Director of Community Development for the town. Article 27 is for the design and construction, including site work for the Eldridge Garage property project. After the town purchased the subject property in 2017, the Select Board created the Eldridge Garage Property Planning Committee. The Eldridge Garage Planning Committee's charge was to examine and make recommendations to the Select Board on the use of the Eldridge Garage property. The committee focused its recommendations on the overall design and operation of the property. The committee held 17 meetings and sought input from abutters, the public, and representatives from other boards and committees. Ultimately, the committee recommended that the existing disturbed area be upgraded and used for year-round parking. The committee would also like to see the existing building restored if possible, but at a minimum replicated and used as a visitor center with amenities such as restrooms and device charging stations. Also recommended is a transportation center with a shuttle to Lighthouse Beach and the Fish Pier, and possibly other destinations. A bicycle rack, a bicycle repair kit, and an electric vehicle charging station are also recommended. Finally, the committee recommends that the back portion of the lot be left as open space, seeded with a wildflower mix and a path to view the salt marsh in the rear of the property. Annual Town Meeting 2019 approved funds for the site design, engineering, and architectural services, as well as permitting. The design team, led by Catalyst Architecture, formerly Brown, Lindquist, Finuccio, and Raber, with professional support from Coastal Engineering and Olmsted Design, has completed field reviews and data collection activities for the existing building, site, and environmental conditions. The design team also completed a structural review on the existing building for the site and explored options for rehabilitation of the existing structure versus construction of a new building. As the reuse of the existing structure will be more costly and result in very little of the existing building to remain, this proposal calls for construction of a new building which will replicate the existing building. The new building will consist of 2 family-size restrooms, a lobby area which will have photographs and memorabilia that will pay tribute to the history of the site and the Eldridge family, device charging stations, and include a map with points of interest for the town of Chatham. The proposal calls for the building to be moved slightly forward to the front of the site to allow for better traffic flow in the parking area. The estimated cost of the project is $1,495,555 and is proposed to be funded from free cash. Town officials have been contacted by a nearby property owner who would like to make a donation to the town for the redevelopment of this property. At this time, final terms of this donation have not been determined. However, the article is written in such a way that acceptance of such donation will offset the overall cost of the project. The donation funds, once received, will either pay for the project or reimburse the town for funds expended. It is also required that in order for the town to bid a project, funds must be allocated prior to putting a project out for bid. This project will require approval by the Historic Business District Commission as well as the Planning Board. The Select Board voted to recommend this project in a vote of 5-0-0, and the Finance Committee voted to recommend the project in a vote of 6-0-0.
Articles 28 and 29 propose an increase to the local room occupancy tax. So I'm going to discuss them together at first and then segregate the differences. So Article 29, we're starting with 29 rather than 28, which will not be needed if 28 passes, is just to increase the local room occupancy tax from 4% to 6%. The local room occupancy tax is the tax that's paid on both short-term rentals and what we call traditional lodging. As you might recall, the short-term rental tax took effect recently, and his town has collected, to date this fiscal year, $1.6 million from that source alone. The Select Board reviewed that fact and decided to recommend to increase the local room occupancy tax from 4% to 6%, which is the maximum that the Mass General Law will allow towns to collect. When the Select Board approved Article 29, there was discussion on whether or not they should segregate funds for a special purpose or if funds should close to the general fund. Because Article 29 was recommended first by the Select Board, it was just to increase the tax. Subsequently, the Select Board voted on Article 28 to allocate that 2% of the room occupancy tax to special revenue funds. So if Article 28 passes, what that does is increases the local room occupancy tax from 4% to 6%, but then segregates that 2%, that additional 2% revenue for special purposes, specifically 1% for attainable housing and 1% to support the Chatham Elementary School. If this tax were in effect right now, we would have had $800,000 going into that attainable housing fund and $800,000 to the Chatham Elementary School Support Fund. And as you might recall, when we discussed the school assessment for the Monomoy Regional School District, the increase to Chatham for taking care of its own elementary school was $739,000 for this year alone, and that will continue moving forward as part of the assessment. So again, this is to increase the local room occupancy tax and segregate it under Article 28. Under Article 29 is just to increase the local room occupancy tax, and the funds would close to the general fund revenue, specifically free cash. If Article 28 is approved by town meeting, it is quite likely that Article 29 will not be moved on town meeting floor. Article 28 was approved by the Select Board by a vote of 5 in favor, none opposed. The Finance Committee also made a recommendation to approve this article, 6 in favor, none opposed, none abstaining. Article 29 had unanimous support by the Select Board, 5 in favor, none opposed. However, the Finance Committee were 2 in favor and 4 opposed to that article, mostly due to the fact that the funds were not going to be segregated. Again, Article 29 was heard by both committees prior to Article 28.
Article 30, feasibility on reuse of Chatham Health and Swim Club. This article is to see if the town will vote to appropriate and transfer from free cash the sum of $50,000 for a feasibility study and evaluation of the Chatham Health and Swim Club property located at 251 Crowell Road, in order for the Select Board to have sufficient information to determine the cost benefits if the town were to acquire the property. A petitioned article to purchase the Chatham Health and Swim Club for use by all town citizens was submitted and is included as Article 58 of the warrant. The Select Board voted against approval of the article as more information is needed on the current condition of the building and estimates for improvements needed to bring it into ADA code compliance, and estimates on annual maintenance and staffing. This article seeks to fund a feasibility study to answer those questions, which will better inform any consideration of purchasing the facility, to determine if there are any viable opportunities for the property to be used as a town facility. The Select Board voted to recommend this article 5-0-0.
Articles 31 through 42 are the Community Preservation Act articles. Again, these are annual articles that you see for the administrative budget as well as the CPA reserves, the 10% requirement by statute. That's Article 31, which is appropriating $15,000 for the annual administrative budget. And then Article 32 is to appropriate the reserves. The reserves will be appropriated out in the forthcoming articles. And I want to note that all the CPA articles were approved unanimously by both the Select Board, the Finance Committee, and the Community Preservation Committee, unless I note so after speaking to a particular article. So I'm grouping these by the purpose for which they're voted. So we have the affordable housing articles. We're looking at Article 33 to fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund in an amount of $500,000 for FY 2023. Article 34 is $30,000 for an affordable housing coordinator. Article 35 is $15,000 for the Housing Institute. Article 36 is to fund a development in Orleans, the former Cape Cod 5 property redevelopment proposed by Penrose LLC. That is the one that did not have a unanimous vote, and that is requesting $100,000 from Chatham CPA funds for this affordable housing in Orleans. The Community Preservation Committee made a recommendation of 8 in favor, none opposed. The Select Board recommendation approved 2 in favor, 3 opposed, and the Finance Committee recommendation was 7 in favor and none opposed. Articles 37, 38, and 39 are for the historic purposes. Article 37 is requesting $75,000 for the Marconi Lattice Towers Preservation, Restoration, and Relocation Study. Article 38 is for the Atwood Museum Roofing and Siding Restoration. And Article 39 is the Nickerson Family Historic Barn Preservation. Marconi Lattice Towers is requesting $75,000 for a study to look at relocating one of the towers away from Riders Cove, and also to restore and preserve the 2 other towers. The Atwood Museum Roofing and Siding Restoration is requesting $20,860 for the historic portion of the building that would qualify for CPA funds, part of a larger project, just over $70,000 for their roofing and siding. And the Nickerson Family Farm is looking at the preservation of the barn that was formerly at Shell Drive and it dates back to the 1600s. And this barn was located at 68 Shell Drive. Again, it is believed to be built by William Nickerson's son, William Jr. The Nickerson Family Association has requested $300,000 for the preservation and restoration of this barn. Article 40, 41, and 42 are for recreational purposes. Article 40 is requesting $300,000 for the Volunteer Park Playground. Again, the existing playground at Volunteer Park was donated to the town in 2000 and was completed in 2001, making it over 20 years old. So the replacement playground will meet Consumer Product Safety Commission and American with Disability Act guidelines and will enhance the amenities at the playground. Again, the existing playground is over 20 years old and is in need of replacement. Article 41 is for bikeways improvement, and these funds are matching grants. So the Bikeways Committee is requesting $90,000 as part of a matching grant to look at the Old Colony Rail Trail shared path on George Ryder Road. So again, this would be part of a larger project. The Bikeways Committee has applied for the grant through Mass Trails and is expecting the estimated cost for the whole design and construction is $365,000. However, this request is $90,000 from the Community Preservation Act funds. Article 42, the Community Preservation Act, Jackknife Harbor Beach, is requesting $100,000 and is also a matching grant. It's part of a larger project, $400,000, with the balance coming from the Coastal Zone Management Resiliency Grant. So $100,000 from Community Preservation Act funds, and the purpose of this is to fund the installation of native vegetation and materials to stabilize the shoreline down at Jackknife Harbor Beach, a very popular beach in the town of Chatham. The Community Preservation Committee recommended this by a vote of 7 in favor, none opposed, and 1 abstention, and both the Select Board and Finance Committee provided support by unanimous votes.
The next article up for consideration will be Article 43, the Waterways Bylaw. And the article that's before you tonight is basically a rewrite of the Chapter 265, the Waterways section of the general bylaws. As you may recall, back in 2017 and 2018, town staff, the Waterways Advisory Committee, and interested members of the public worked on a substantial rewrite of the waterways regulations, which resulted in a new set of waterways regulations being adopted in 2018 by the Harbor Master. One of the issues that came out of that rewrite, and a positive thing, was to then take a look at the Waterways Bylaw, Section 265, or Chapter 265 of the general bylaws, to make sure that there weren't any inconsistencies between the revised regulations and the bylaw, and also to work towards streamlining the bylaw to some extent, to take out things that were considered surplus, and maybe were already covered in state or federal regulations, so that they didn't need to be duplicated in the bylaw, which was becoming fairly extensive and had a lot of things added to it over the years. And so basically it needed a good general cleanup. So the Waterways Committee embarked on that effort back in 2019, just prior to the beginning of the pandemic, and has worked diligently over the last basically 3 years to bring you something to review tonight and hopefully adopt. The Waterways Bylaw Committee also worked with town staff as well as special counsel to ensure that the bylaw was on solid legal grounds as well as consistent with state and/or federal regulations. And so before you tonight, you have this rewrite of the Waterways Bylaw. Many of the changes were simply clearing up language, removing duplicate language for things that were already, say, covered in the regulations or state or federal law. There were a couple of new items, if you will, that I will bring to your attention. One of which was the definition of commercial fishing vessel classification or mooring. And that was done to make it a little clearer, not a little, but clearer for everyone involved, from somebody applying under that classification to the harbor master staff that have to implement it, as well as the general public, as to just what requirements were necessary to fall into that commercial fishing vessel classification. And so basically we removed, or we're proposing to remove, the section that someone has to derive 75% of their income to be in that classification. Because as you can imagine, that's very hard to determine. There was difficulty sometimes in asking people to provide copies of, say, their federal income tax forms and whatnot. So it raised a number of issues going in that direction. So we did hopefully streamline that definition to indicate that you had to have a license issued by the Commonwealth Department of Marine Fisheries to sell or harvest seafood products. The vessel has to be documented commercially in Massachusetts, and you have to be a resident of Massachusetts. And if you basically meet those three criteria, your operation would then fall under the commercial fishing vessel classification. One other fairly significant change, we created, or it's proposed to be created, a mooring advisory board. Under the old bylaw, if you wanted to appeal a decision of the harbor master, that appeal had to go to the Board of Selectmen. That's the way it was set up. The selectmen were not necessarily considered the best board to be hearing those, because, you know, they don't necessarily have the expertise in the waterways and other associated issues, as well as, you know, some concern about the potential for politics coming into play. So after a fairly substantial amount of discussion, including with members of the Board of Selectmen at various drafts, it was suggested that a mooring advisory committee or mooring advisory board be created, which would consist of the Waterways Advisory Committee, which has wide representation of various waterways interests, as well as a member of the Board of Selectmen to maintain that link between the policymaking body, the Board of Selectmen, or the Select Board, and the Waterways Advisory Committee. Many of the other changes, as you leaf through it, you can see them in the warrant. They're all spelled out with red line, with crossouts or new underlined language. And the only other area where significant changes were made was in the appeals section, which is section 265-23. And that is designed primarily to bring it more in line with the state regulations for appeals of mooring-related issues. Because there is a provision that allows appeals to go to the Division of Waterways at the state level of decisions by the harbor master. And so we wanted to make sure that our appeals process was consistent with the language in the state statute and met the various timelines in the state statute for when those appeals have to be carried out. And so with that, that is a quick summary of the Waterways bylaw proposed article. The vote on Article 43 by the Select Board was 5-0, and the vote by the Finance Committee was 7-0 in support of the article. Okay, the next item that I'd like to discuss is Article 44, the proposed unencapsulated foam prohibition. This article came out of some public input that various committees, the Waterways Advisory Committee, Shellfish Advisory Committee, and the South Coastal Harbor Plan Committee received from a concerned citizen a couple of years ago as it relates to the blue foam blocks, these big blocks of blue foam that you've probably seen supporting floating docks and other structures in the local waterways of Chatham. It's been used for a number of years, both here and frankly around the world, to support floating structures that aren't of any major size. The downside to this, as we learned over the years, is that this foam can degrade over time. It can become damaged in storms and for other reasons, and it then releases basically plastic particles into the environment. And a couple of years ago, we had a fairly severe storm event in the fall, and a lot of floating docks, because they were still in the water, were damaged and thrown up on the beach. And a large number of these chunks of blue foam, as well as very, very tiny pieces, were found throughout the shorelines of Chatham. In addition to being a visual pollution like that, as this foam breaks down into microplastics, they can be taken up by various marine life, fish, shellfish, and whatnot, and get up through the food chain, ultimately getting into the humans that are the end consumers, if you will. So this individual, this member of the public, came to the various committees, spoke about her concern about this foam, and so as a result, this article has been prepared, which would basically outlaw the use of this unencapsulated, so foam that is not already pre-manufactured with some substantial outer coating to it. So the use of the bare blue foam would not be allowed for new construction, for new floating docks, or swim floats, or floats attached to shoreline structures, so docks and piers. New floats would be required to use plastic float boxes, or these big black totes that are made out of substantial plastic, or they could use a foam provided it's specially encapsulated for use in in-water applications. And that is available on the market. So if it's hit by a boat or it breaks loose in a storm and hits the beach, the foam doesn't break up. It's protected by this encapsulation. Any existing floats would have to be brought into compliance when they are repaired, or they need to be replaced, say, after a storm event or something like that. They could not reuse the blue foam. They would have to get rid of that and use either the plastic tote boxes or the encapsulated foam. And the primary reason for this is to prevent the degradation of that foam over time, and the introduction of plastics along our shoreline and into the environment, as well as the food chain. There was some discussion originally that this article would have a sunset clause in it, which would basically outlaw the use of these blue foam blocks in all docks and piers by a date certain. However, when that was brought to public hearing a couple of months ago by the Waterways Advisory Committee, they received a fair amount of feedback from primarily the marina owners, that have a lot of floating docks, and therefore, it can be a substantial cost as well as effort to replace them all in a certain period of time. There was a lot of discussion about, that sunset clause, being able to meet it, and what an appropriate timeline might be. Originally, there was talk of 2025, January 1, 2025. There was subsequent discussion about maybe later, closer to 2030. And ultimately, the Waterways Advisory Committee removed that sunset provision from the article, and made the determination in concert with several of the other committees, the South Coastal Harbor Plan and the Shellfish Advisory Committee, as well as the marina owners, that they would meet over the course of this upcoming summer and early fall to talk about that and hopefully come to an agreement on an appropriate sunset clause provision, taking into account the large numbers of floats that marinas have. The cost involved, as I'm sure everybody knows, the cost of everything right now is up substantially, as well as supply chain difficulties. Right now, it's extremely difficult to get large volumes, if you will, or large numbers of these floats, because they're just like everything, they're having difficulty getting them manufactured, shipped, and whatnot. And so the committees agreed to hold off on that discussion about the sunset clause, but there was enough concern to do something that the committees all voted, the Shellfish Advisory Committee, the Waterways Advisory Committee, the South Coastal Harbor Plan, and the Conservation Commission all have voted to support bringing forth an article this year to at least start the process by banning the use of the foam in new floats and banning the use of the foam when floats have to be repaired or replaced, and then potentially come back at a future town meeting to revise this section to put in a sunset clause, by which time all floats in Chatham would have to have the foam replaced. And so that is the article that's before you tonight. And that article was supported 5-0 by the Select Board and 6-0 by the Finance Committee. Next article I'd like to speak to you about is Article 45. And this is the polystyrene and expanded polystyrene foam revision. If the previous article, if Article 44 were to pass and basically outlaw the use of blue foam blocks or unencapsulated blue foam for floats in marine and freshwater environments, it would be at odds with a certain sentence in Chapter 215, the polystyrene and expanded polystyrene foam section of the general bylaw. Chapter 215 was passed a number of years ago in response to concern over the use primarily of plastic foam cups. So foam coffee cups, as well as foam takeout containers from restaurants, markets, and other locations. And so with the backing of the Board of Health and others, Chapter 215 was passed to basically outlaw the use of polystyrene foam in those coffee cups and takeout containers. It did, however, include a number of exemptions to that ban, and basically it exempted the use of polystyrene foam insulation in the building industry, because that polystyrene foam is then generally covered over by, plywood or some other material so that it can't break down. And it also permitted the use of polystyrene foam used in moorings or in the construction of floats. So if Article 44 is passed by town meeting, which prohibits the use of floats, it would now be in opposition to this language, which allows the use of polystyrene and expanded polystyrene foam in Chapter 215. So as a housekeeping measure, as indicated in the article, we simply want to strike "or in construction of floats," remove that from the exemptions that are allowed in Article 215, so that Article 215 would then be consistent with Article 265, or with Chapter 265 of the general bylaws, which prohibits the use of this foam in floats. And that was voted, this article, Article 45, was voted 5-0 for support by the Board of Selectmen, the Select Board, and also 6-0 by the Finance Committee.
Article 46 is a Home Rule Charter revision. This article requires a 2/3 vote at town meeting, and if approved, will be presented at the ballot the following year in 2023. There's one change presented by the Charter Review Committee, and that's regarding the periodic charter review. Information is included in the warrant for details. The Select Board voted 4-0-0 to recommend approval, and the Finance Committee also voted unanimously 6-0-0. Again, it requires a 2/3 vote at town meeting.
Article 47 is to refile a home rule petition to establish a new housing trust. This article was previously approved at annual town meeting 2021 and formerly Article 20 in the June 12, 2021 warrant. As final action may not be taken on this home rule petition, which is now House Bill 4059, in the state legislature before the end of the current legislative session, it was recommended by Representative Sarah Peake's office that the town meeting reaffirm the vote so that the vote is valid during the next session in the event that they are not voted on before that time. The current Affordable Housing Trust can only fund projects up to 100% of the area median income. And whereas the town of Chatham is in need of both affordable, up to 100% AMI, and attainable housing, up to 200% AMI, to help keep our generational, young, and working families in Chatham. For FY 2020, the 100% area median income for Barnstable County for a family of 4 was $96,600, and the 200% area median income for a family of 4 is $193,200. The creation of one trust with 2 funding sources will be able to better serve the needs of the community by building upon our current Affordable Housing Trust, which was established by town meeting in 2006, to include attainable housing options. Special legislation is needed for the town to effectuate this change. The Select Board voted 5-0-0 to recommend this article, and the Finance Committee voted 6-0-0 to recommend this article. Article 48 is to file a home rule petition to establish a real property transfer fee to fund affordable and attainable housing. This article was previously approved at Annual Town Meeting 2021, formerly Article 21 in the June 12, 2021 warrant. As final action may not be taken on this home rule petition, which is now House Bill 4060, in the state legislature before the end of the current legislative session, it was recommended by Representative Sarah Peak's office that the town meeting reaffirm the vote so that the vote is valid during the next session, in the event they are not voted on before that time. The real property transfer fee would provide an additional revenue source for the creation of affordable and attainable housing in the town. Though we have a dedicated source for the creation of affordable housing, the town does not currently have a dedicated source of funding for much-needed attainable housing, and this fee would provide that funding. Affordable Housing Trust funds appropriated from Community Preservation Act funds can only be used for affordable projects up to 100% AMI. The additional funds to be generated by the proposed transfer fee would allow the Affordable Housing Trust or the proposed Chatham Housing Trust to fund attainable housing projects up to 200% of the area median income. For FY 2020, the 100% area median income in Barnstable County for a family of 4 was $96,600, and the 200% area median income for a family of 4 is $193,200. As noted in the proposed special legislation, the real property transfer fee is equal to 0.5% of the purchase price paid upon the transfer of any real property interest for consideration of $2 million or more, and the fee shall be paid by and be the liability of the purchaser. Certain transfers would be exempt from this requirement, including intra-family transfers. This fee shall be a 10-year duration from the date this legislation takes effect and may continue for additional 5-year periods upon a majority vote at town meeting for a reauthorization of the fee. The fee may be decreased or increased, the qualifying threshold transfer amount may be revised, or the fee may be eliminated by a 2/3 vote of town meeting. Special legislation is needed to effectuate this new fee. The Select Board voted 4 in favor, 1 against, with 0 abstentions on this article, and the Finance Committee voted 5 in favor, 1 against, and 0 abstentions on this article. Article 49 is to refile a home rule petition for the use of Community Preservation Act funds for affordable and attainable housing up to 200% area median income. This article was previously approved at Annual Town Meeting 2021, formerly Article 22 in the June 12, 2021 warrant. As final action may not be taken on this home rule petition, which is now House Bill 4058, in the state legislature before the end of the current legislative session, it was recommended by Representative Sarah Peak's office that town meeting reaffirm the vote so that the vote is valid during the next session in the event that they are not voted on before that time. The town of Chatham is in need of both affordable up to 100% AMI and attainable up to 200% AMI housing. For FY 2020, the 100% area median income in Barnstable County for a family of 4 is $96,600, and the 200% area median income for a family of 4 is $193,200. The current CPA statute only allows CPA funds to be used to fund projects for persons and families whose annual income is less than the 100% area median income. An authorization of CPA funds used for efforts to create housing for persons and families within the 200% AMI income limit would help the town of Chatham create both types of housing opportunities to help keep our generational, young, and working families in Chatham. Special legislation is needed for the town to effectuate this change. The Select Board voted 5 in favor, 0 against, and 0 abstentions on this article. And the Finance Committee voted to recommend this article 6 in favor, 0 against, and 0 abstentions.
Article 50 is a refile of a home rule petition relating to waiving prevailing wage requirements for town projects. This article was approved in 2015 and every 2 years after that. However, it does expire in the legislative session, which is every 2 years. So this article is being presented again to town meeting to offer flexibility for local contractors to bid on town projects and not requiring to use prevailing wage. This article will not discourage unions or discourage any contractors from working with the town. It actually provides more flexibility. This article received approval by the Select Board 400 and from the Finance Committee 700.
Article 51 is a protective zoning bylaw amendment to Section 7B19, the accessory dwelling unit bylaw. This is a proposed amendment to the accessory dwelling unit bylaw that was passed at annual meeting 2019. Accessory dwelling units are separate independent living spaces which are integrated into a single-family residential structure or built as a detached structure on a residential property. Since the bylaw approval, the town has received a total of 4 ADU applications. 3 ADUs were approved through the special permit process, and 1 application was withdrawn after it was determined that the property owner was not a year-round resident. This proposed amendment would revise the existing ADU bylaw to eliminate the requirement for both the principal dwelling and the ADU to be occupied on a year-round basis, by allowing either the ADU or the principal dwelling to be leased for a minimum of 12 consecutive months, with no subletting to occur. This revision would allow seasonal residents to create an ADU. The second proposed revision would allow all interior ADUs to be permitted by right. The Planning Board believes that these proposed revisions could allow additional use of the bylaw. The cap of 10 by right permits and 10 special permits within a 12-month period, already included in the bylaw, would still be in effect, and all current ADU requirements outlined in the bylaw would continue to apply. The Planning Board voted to recommend this article 600. The Select Board voted to recommend the article in a vote of 500. And the Finance Committee voted to recommend the article in a vote of 700. This would also require a 2/3 majority vote at town meeting. Article 52 is a mandatory protective zoning bylaw amendment to Section 4B under the floodplain district. The warrant article would revise the existing floodplain district bylaw to include mandatory additional requirements for administrative management of permits in the floodplain. In addition, mandatory revisions to the article would include ensuring adequate drainage is provided in subdivisions in the floodplain in certain rare flood zones, minimizing flood damage in subdivisions, and requiring that recreational vehicles in the floodplain are either elevated and anchored in accordance with the zone's regulations for foundation and elevation requirements, and be on a site for less than 180 consecutive days, or be fully licensed and highway ready. The update to the floodplain bylaw is mandatory to remain in the National Flood Insurance Program. Chatham has participated in the National Flood Insurance Program since 1980, And this program allows residents and businesses to have access to federally backed flood insurance that is often more affordable than flood insurance from the private market. If the town does not comply with the National Flood Insurance Program requirements, 465 Chatham floodplain policyholders will lose their flood insurance policies, which could affect existing mortgages. Any federally backed mortgage in the floodplain is required to have flood insurance that meets certain coverage requirements. This article was recommended by the Planning Board in a vote of 6-0-0. The Select Board voted to recommend the article 5-0-0, and the Finance Committee voted to recommend the article in a vote of 7-0-0. A 2/3 majority vote is required for this article to pass. Article 53 is a protective zoning bylaw amendment relating to the clarification of definition of sizes and exemption from coverage calculation for small sheds. This article serves two purposes. First, the existing language addresses storage sheds of over 100 square feet and those under 100 square feet, but through inadvertence doesn't address those which measure exactly 100 square feet. And the proposed change clarifies the matter. In addition, it would exempt storage sheds of 100 square feet or less from coverage limitations in the bylaw. At present, a homeowner wanting a small storage shed in many cases is required to go before the Zoning Board of Appeals for relief, which sometimes cannot be granted. And this change would allow for the installation of a single one-story storage shed without consideration of coverage issues. All other dimensional requirements, including setbacks, would still apply. The Planning Board voted to recommend this article in a vote of 6-0-0. The Select Board voted to recommend this article in a vote of 5-0-0. And the Finance Committee voted to recommend this article in a vote of 7-0-0. This article requires a 2/3 majority vote in order to pass. Article 54 is a protective zoning bylaw amendment for new historic preservation incentives and variations of dimensional requirements. This proposed bylaw encourages the preservation of buildings, structures, sites, and settings of historical or architectural significance by allowing such buildings to remain in place, by expanding viable options for the reuse of historic buildings, and by permitting flexibility of dimensional requirements that might be an impediment to the historic preservation. This proposed bylaw would apply to eligible historic buildings as defined in Section 158-2 of the Chatham General Bylaw in all zoning districts. To ensure that the historic structure is preserved, a preservation restriction would be required for any historic home that received a special permit for dimensional incentives. The Planning Board voted to recommend this article in a vote of 6-0-0. The Select Board voted to recommend the article in a vote of 5-0-0, and the Finance Committee voted to recommend the article in a vote of 7-0-0. This article will require a 2/3 majority vote at town meeting. Article 61 is for the reuse of structures at 127 Old Harbor Road. The property at 127 Old Harbor Road was bequeathed to the town of Chatham in the last will and testament of Marion Nickerson Ellis. The November 2nd, 1971 special town meeting voted to authorize the selectmen to accept for the town a bequest from the estate of the late Marion Nickerson Ellis of her land on Old Harbor Road in Chatham. Said bequest to be accepted with the provision and upon the condition that said property be designated the Augustus and Marion Ellis Playground, and that no buildings other than those presently on said premises shall be placed or maintained thereon, and said property shall be used as additional playground and recreational area for the present site of the school located on the abutting property of the town. The property consists of the former residential structure, a barn, and a shed, as well as the playground area. The barn and shed are currently used for storage for various town departments, and the former residential building, used in the past as offices for the water department, is currently vacant. This proposal seeks town meeting's authorization to repurpose only the specified 41,817 square feet portion of the subject property and does not in any way impact the present playground area on the property. The town will continue to honor the intent of the Marion Nickerson Ellis bequest to protect and preserve the playground. However, the existing structures on the property could be an asset to the community in the form of much-needed, affordable, and attainable housing. The Select Board voted 3 in favor, 2 against, and 0 abstentions for this article. The Finance Committee voted 6 in favor, 1 against, and 0 abstentions on this article. And this article requires a 2/3 vote to be passed at town meeting. Article 62 is to grant a perpetual conservation restriction on a portion, approximately 15.2 acres, of the town-owned Middle Road property and designate and authorize disposition of the remaining portion, approximately 4.09 acres, of said Middle Road property for affordable and attainable housing. The identification and development of municipal parcels that are suitable for housing development is a key strategy in the 2018 Chatham Housing Production Plan to increase housing resources. The Housing Production Plan also highlights this town-owned property to the north of Middle Road as a parcel that would be suitable for housing development. The town also understands that preserving in perpetuity this town-owned property is important. This article, recommended by the Community Housing Partnership, proposes a compromise by preserving through a conservation restriction a majority of the parcel, approximately 15.2 acres, and proposing development for affordable and attainable housing on the southwestern portion of the parcel adjacent to Middle Road, which is approximately 4.09 acres. The property is zoned municipal and town sewer is not currently available. However, could be extended to the property. A feasibility study will be completed on a portion of this parcel dedicated to the affordable and attainable housing to determine the best type of housing for this site. Community input will be sought and encouraged through a series of community input meetings before the town prepares and issues a request for proposals to create affordable and attainable housing. The Select Board voted 5 in favor and 0 against to recommend this article. The Finance Committee voted 6 in favor, 1 against, and 0 abstentions for this article. And this article requires a 2/3 vote at town meeting in order to be approved.
The last article that I'd like to speak to, and it just so happens to be the last article on the town meeting warrant, is Article 63, the Goose Pond Forest Conservation Restriction. This article is proposed by the Open Space Committee, and this pertains to the land that is on the north side of Middle Road, across from the wastewater treatment plant and the capped landfill. It is part of the Goose Pond Forest area. This article was purchased by the town many years ago, primarily for use of expansion of the landfill at the time. It's never been used for that purpose. It's no longer needed for that purpose. And so the Open Space Committee has proposed putting this land under a conservation restriction, which would maintain this land in its natural open state in perpetuity. Goose Pond, as you're probably familiar with, the Goose Pond Conservation Area is a fairly expansive area. It surrounds the Goose Pond watershed and extends all the way over to Meeting House Road in a variety of different parcels. This one is approximately 19 acres. It has a number of wetland areas in it. It supports many other wildlife and wetland species. It provides other uses such as trails and simply being able to get out into nature. And so the Open Space Committee is proposing to protect this area by placing it under the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission and then putting a conservation restriction on the property, which would prevent other uses of the property other than for open space and passive recreation purposes. And so that is Article 63. This article was not supported by the Select Board on a vote of 0-4-1, and it was similarly not supported by the Finance Committee on a vote of 1-6-0.
Thank you for watching the 2022 Annual Town Meeting Preview Show. The warrant for town meeting is available online on the town's website, and hard copies have been mailed out to each household. A reminder, as of Tuesday, May 3rd, the Select Board voted to change the venue to outdoors. Town meeting will take place on Saturday, May 14th at 1 p.m. on Veterans Field at 1 Veterans Field Road. Additional parking is available at the Community Center at 702 Main Street. Free childcare is available by reservation. In addition to our regular broadcasts on Channel 18, you can re-watch this previous show on demand through Channel 18 YouTube channel.